Hi there. Welcome to the Living Bridge Center YouTube channel. I'm your host, Angelica, and today I will be talking with Mike about neurodiversity and relationships. So, I have some experience with neurodiversity among family and friends and other people that I work with, but I don't know too much about it. So, Mike, my question to you is, how does neurodiversity affect our relationships?
That's a great question, Angelica. As you know, I have Asperger's syndrome, which is part of the autism spectrum. Autism and some other kinds of neurodiversity like ADHD are considered neurodevelopmental in origin, which means they have to do with how our nerves develop physiologically. And yet the main diagnostic criteria, at least for autism, have to do with social communication and interaction. So this is a puzzle. How can the way a person's nerves develop affect their social interactions? For me, this is a personal question, and I believe many other neurodiverse people, whether ourselves or people we know, might wonder about this too. How can relationship difficulties be traced back to how our nervous system develops? Now, some people, when they hear the term nervous system, might only think about our brain. However, our nervous system is much more than just our brain. Our whole body is filled with nerves connected to our brain that also connect to our ears, our eyes, our taste buds, and our fingers and toes. So our nervous system also includes our sense organs. And when we talk about neurodiversity, we are also talking about our senses. So I suggest we rephrase the question to this: how does neurodiversity affect relationships from the perspective of our 12 human senses?
12 senses. Oh, okay. So I was under the impression there was only 5.
Of course, 5 senses have been known since ancient times. The senses of touch, smell, taste, sight, and hearing. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, 4 more senses were added to this list. First, we have tiny organs all over our skin that can sense warmth and coldness. So this gives us a sense of warmth that is distinct from our sense of touch. Second, we have nerves that run all through our body that can sense the state of our interior organs. This allows us to scan our body for sensations of pain and discomfort. This sense is called interoception, but less formally we will just call it our sense of life. We also have nerves that can sense whether our muscles are contracted or relaxed. Technically, this is called proprioception, but we will simply say it's our sense of movement. And fourth, we have a sense of balance, connected to the vestibular organs inside our head, adjacent to the inner ear. Contemporary science fully recognizes the 5 traditional senses, plus these 4 new ones, making a total of 9.
Okay, but didn't you say there were 12? So what about the other 3?
According to anthroposophic science, we have 3 more senses. The first of these is our sense of speech. To understand this sense, it may be helpful to consider how there is a big difference between spoken words and other kinds of sounds. Of course, we hear both words and non-word sounds with our ears, with our sense of hearing. But words differ because they also have a meaning. It's like there's something meaningful inside the sound, and we perceive this inside part using our sense of speech. Let's take an example of a situation where meaningful words occur alongside meaningless word-like sounds. You might be familiar with this one. It's that holiday song that goes, "Deck the halls with boughs of holly, fa la 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 la." Sorry for my bad singing.
No, it's good. I enjoyed it. Yeah.
All right, so now let's compare holly with fa la 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 la. Someone hearing this for the first time might not know what holly means, but they might sense that it has some kind of meaning. They might ask someone or look it up in a dictionary and find out that holly is a meaningful word that refers to a plant with thorny leaves and red berries. By contrast, the same person would likely not think that fa la 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 was some kind of meaningful word and would probably not decide to look it up in a dictionary. because they would just know it was not a real word. How do we know the difference? Through our sense of speech. We sense how the word holly has a kind of inside part, its meaning, while fa la 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 is just an outward sound with no conceptual part. It's a bit subtle perhaps, but this is our sense of speech, our direct sensation that an expression has a meaning.
Yeah, it is pretty subtle, so I'm not sure if I quite understand.
Well, we call it our sense of speech, but it works with any kind of expression, including nonverbal expressions, such as what can be expressed by sign language, instrumental music, dance, architecture, and so on. We may not always have words to describe our perceptions of meaning, just like with other senses such as taste or movement or touch. But through our sense of speech, we do experience something very definite, something that is outside of ourselves, out in the external world. A good example of a nonverbal expression might be an inukshuk. Imagine you were out in the wilderness and you came across one of these piles of rocks. It's likely that it would catch your attention as something that stands out from the rest of the landscape. Your sense of speech would instantly pick up on the fact that this was some kind of speaking. To our sense of sight alone, an inuksuk appears to be a pile of rocks, pretty much like any other. However, to our sense of speech, it completely stands out from the landscape as something entirely different from any kind of natural formation, even before we have had a chance to think about it. Maybe moments later we do think about it and we might reason how it's probably something made intentionally by human beings, as if to say something, even though we may not know what it intends to convey. But before we can think about it, we have already sensed that it is a kind of speaking. Just like how colors, tastes, and touch sensations appear to us through our other senses, seemingly for no reason, so too does it just appear to us that this particular pile of stones has a meaning, compared to some other pile of stones that does not. So I hope this helps to reach a first understanding about our sense of speech, our ability to sense meaning behind some kind of expression, whether verbal or nonverbal.
Okay. Yeah, I really like the inukshuk example. It really helps illustrate, at least for me, what you mean by the sense of speech. Okay. So what about the other two new senses?
The second new sense is our sense of mind. The sense of mind is the immediate, present sensation of another person's thoughts and mental images, what they're currently thinking or mentally imaging. Our sense of mind is entirely separate from the sense of speech, which works through some kind of expression. We can make a recording of someone, such as a YouTube video, and then at another time someone else can watch this and see and hear the expressions and sense the various meanings through their sense of speech. But the sense of mind does not work like this. It can't work through a video recording. Just like our eye can only see the color red when red is present in our field of vision, so can our sense of mind only perceive another person's mind when it is present to our field of awareness. So to perceive another person's current thoughts and mental images, we must be there at the moment these are forming in them as a living activity. Our sense of mind is basically mind reading, the ability to sense in another person their inner activity in forming a thought or creating a mental image in their mind. We can be aware of this mental activity in our own minds relatively easily. But now we're talking about sensing that same process going on in someone else's mind, outside and beyond ourselves.
Very interesting. I think I've had a lot of experiences like that, actually.
And finally, the 12th one is our sense of self. This is our direct sensation of who another person is. It's safe to assume that all of us have had times when we experience ourselves differently on the inside compared to how others experience who we are from an outside perspective. And it's the same the other way around. We experience others and judge others based on how they appear on the outside. But we may have no idea, in fact, about who they really are on the inside. we human beings actually spend a significant portion of our waking hours every day misjudging each other. Our sense of self is what allows us to bridge this gap to some degree. It allows us to reach out beyond ourselves and sense another being's unique living presence like it was our own. Sensing another being's selfness requires their live immediate presence, much like with the sense of mind. However, more than just sensing another person's thoughts and mental images, the sense of self gives us the ability to shift out of ourselves and sense into another being's beingness. This is also a very subtle sense. Okay, so this was a very brief overview of the theory of 12 human senses, which forms the basis for anthroposophic science.
So I would have thought that the sense of self and sense of mind would be the same thing. But now that I'm thinking back to my own experiences, I can see how they're completely separate senses. Okay, so why aren't these three other senses fully recognized like the others?
Let's consider for a moment what it takes for a sense to be recognized as a sense scientifically. Let's take the sense of balance, for example. It's fair to assume that people even thousands of years ago were fully aware that we had a sense of balance and that if we spin around a bunch of times, we get dizzy and maybe fall over. And yet balance was not one of the traditional 5 senses. Why not? Because the physical organ had not yet been discovered, and this didn't happen until the early 20th century. Once the physical organ was discovered, balance was immediately recognized as a sense. So 2 things seem to be necessary. First, we need to have the psychological sensation of something just appearing to us without our having any influence over it. And second, we need to identify the sense organ or neural structure in our physical body that delivers this sensation. Now, with these 3 new senses, we can identify the psychological experience, but until someone pinpoints the exact neural mechanism, they will not be fully recognized scientifically as senses. That's quite reasonable. It's really the same situation as with the sense of balance for thousands of years. And, like with balance, just because the neural mechanism underlying these kinds of sensations hasn't been pinpointed yet, that doesn't mean there isn't one.
All right. So how do the 12 senses connect to neurodiversity?
Many neurodiverse people report being oversensitive to certain fabrics touching their skin, or to certain kinds of light or loud noises. Or they might be undersensitive to experiences of warmth or pain through their sense of life. Or maybe they're a bit clumsy because of a poor sense of movement. Neurodiversity is frequently linked to sensory differences in the 9 scientifically recognized senses. Now, if we assume that the other 3 senses also have some kind of neural organ or neural structure that just hasn't been discovered yet, then maybe neurodiversity could cause differences in these other 3 senses as well. That is to say, maybe the way the nervous system develops in some neurodiverse people could make them more or less sensitive, or perhaps differently sensitive, to meaning through their sense of speech, or how they sense the mind or the self of other people. And if this were true, would this not have an impact on their relationships? There's a lot more to say about how neurodiversity and sensory differences in the 12 senses affect our relationships, which we will explore in our next video.
Wow. Mind blown. Okay, so looking at social deficits through the lens of sensory systems, neurological structural differences in these 3 senses could be the cause of social deficits in neurodiverse people. Definitely something to think about. We will continue this exploration of neurodiversity and how it affects relationships from the perspective of the 12 human senses in our next video, which will be linked in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and consider sharing with a friend. Check out our other videos and playlists. There's a link to our website in the description below. Thank you for watching.